So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final installment of the This Land is Your Land lecture series here at the Architectural Association. My name is Georgia Hablutzel, and I teach here at the AA as part of Diploma Unit 7, along with my colleagues and co-organizers of this lecture series, Platon Isaias and Hamed Khosravi. This series seeks to interrogate the evolving relationships between land, community, and identity, exploring how these themes intersect with architecture, art, law, and visual culture in contested spaces. Sadly, today Anne Bottomley couldn't be with us this evening. However, it's my great pleasure to introduce internationally acclaimed artist and filmmaker Rosalind Nashashibi. Rosalind received her BA in painting from Sheffield Hallam University and her MFA at Glasgow School of Art. In 2020, Rosalind was an artist in residence at the National Gallery here in London, and she was a Turner Prize nominee in 2017 and represented Scotland in the 52nd Venice Biennale. Her work has been exhibited internationally, and she was recently nominated for the 2024 Derek Jarman Award. Rosalind is known for her evocative and layered 16mm films that blend documentary, fiction, and painterly abstraction. Her works often explore themes of intimacy, community, and the tensions between public and private life. By capturing subtle interactions and rhythms, Rosalind invites us to reflect on how land and its institutions shape our relationships with one another, as well as how shared environments are negotiated. As the lecture series wishes to bring a rare and compelling synthesis of perspectives, Rosalind's work captured the lived experiences which resonate with these dynamics. As we delve into tonight's discussion and presentation, let us reflect on the transformative potential of interdisciplinary dialogues like this one, where previous discussions on law meet material, producing lived realities and imaginaries. With that, what new questions can we ask, and what is the impact on this on the production of new spatial paradigms? So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rosalind to the AA.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for coming. Appreciate the coming out on a rainy night. So I was going to show one film tonight and briefly introduce it and talk about it, but now I'm doing the whole thing. So this is going to be kind of informal from my side. I don't know if you want to be formal, but for me, it's going to be informal. So I'm just going to kind of show 3 films. I decided to stick with the 3 films that I made, kind of chronicling life in Palestine or Palestinian life, let's say, because one of them was shot in 48 in Israel proper, what we call 48. In Nazareth. And I think I will show them in a chronological order. So the first one I made in 2002, and that was shot on the West Bank, or in between, let's say, Jerusalem and the West Bank, in an area which is kind of a no man's land. And then we will watch the film that was kind of advertised for tonight, which is Hreash House, which I shot in Nazareth in 2003. A Palestinian family all living in one, kind of extended family all living in one concrete block, which they built up as the different generations had their own families. So kind of a community, a family as a whole community. And the third one, which I shot in Gaza in 2014, just at the very beginning of the last war on Gaza. So, I mean, to give you a sort of basic idea of what I do, I studied painting, and then I quickly got into filmmaking. I mean, I was interested in I used to watch a lot of European art movies, and when I was on my painting course, and I started making short Super 8 films, and then tried 16mm, and quickly just solely got into making 16mm films. So I spent a long time making these, several short films. And then around 2014, so 10 years ago, I came back to painting. So now most of my time I paint and kind of make one film every 2 years or so. You're mainly architecture students, so I think that these 3 films will speak more to this idea of property and land, and I think we just can focus on that tonight. But that, we're so also, in the situation that we're in now, it's the moment to be thinking and talking about Palestine. So we stick with this. So my family background is that my father is Palestinian from Jerusalem, and my mother is from Belfast, from Northern Ireland. So just let that sink in for a little bit. Obviously, they were kind of drawn to one another through this sort of war-torn background. And my father came to the UK in the 60s to study. And he's one of this, which I hear is typical of first-generation immigrants who do need to assimilate. I mean, it was a necessity, and he came to the UK at a time when to be Palestinian was to be a terrorist. I mean, in almost everywhere in the UK. So he did not pass on much to us as children, but we would go to visit my grandparents in Jerusalem if it was summer, or in Jericho in the winters, because Jerusalem is kind of cold in winter, it's a little bit high. And so unfortunately, that stopped when I was still quite young. And then after the first Intifada, which is in the late 80s, my father went back and had to deal with a lot of difficult situations and came home and said he was never passing through Israel again. So we didn't go back. So the first time that I went back, I was after that period from when I was very little. I was 29, and that's when I made this film, Dahiet Al-Bareed, Districts of the Post Office. I guess what I wanted to say about that thing of the first generation is that they often, if they're coming from a trauma, they do not want to pass on the sort of story of the trauma, and they want their children to be able to move on and to kind of not be bogged down in that, right? So I found out most of what I know about Palestine, about my family, through traveling around Europe, meeting other people who knew, or through other relatives. So when I went back at 29, it was really me trying to sort of reconnect with family whom my dad was not really in touch with, and to find out, more. I don't speak Arabic. So in the films, you see they're not subtitled. And that was important, right? So you're seeing the way I saw it, and also those people who may have overheard snatches of conversation in some of the films, certainly in the last one, were not aware that they were being understood, right? So ethically, it's also better, I think, to leave it the way that I experienced it. So District of the Post Office. So this is the name of a neighborhood north of Jerusalem, which my grandfather, he used to run the Palestinian post office under the British mandate, and then later under the Jordanians. And he, along with others, kind of founded this neighborhood for post office workers. And it was founded just after 1948, when so many Jerusalem Palestinians and other Palestinians had lost their homes in West Jerusalem, in the case of Jerusalemites. And so I'm going to read you a little introduction that somebody else wrote about the film, or a sort of review that somebody wrote about the film. It's written by Kamal Bulata, who's a Palestinian artist and scholar, intellectual, or was. And he wrote this piece just after I made the film. I think he wrote it in 2003 about this neighborhood. So I'm going to read it to you so you get a bit more background than I had at the time about the neighborhood. Okay, so Dahiet Al-Bareed, or the Post Office District, was developed north of Jerusalem by a cooperative. initiated by employees of Jerusalem's post office. Most of its residents had lived before the 1948 war in the elegant modern neighborhoods in the Western Hills, outside the old city, that grew up with the upwardly mobile urban residential expansion that began in the early years of the century and accelerated during the British Mandate. When the western part of Jerusalem fell to the Jewish forces in 1948, all those Arab villas nested among pine woods were seized, their residents never allowed to return. Many sought refuge with relatives in the increasingly crowded Old City. As soon as the salvaged half of Jerusalem, that's East Jerusalem, was revivified under Jordanian custody, those who could aspired to leave the Old City for more spacious quarters with more modern facilities. The residential project of the district represented an attempt to recreate the kind of Jerusalem neighborhood that was lost in 1948. Built of the same grey-white stone used in the pre-1948 neighborhoods, the comfortable dwellings were graced with similar arched windows, balconies, multiple verandas, and even the same colorful floral patterned tiles, produced by the same family manufactory in the Old City as the West Jerusalem villas. Similarly, pines and cypresses were planted in the open spaces of the neighborhood. The prosperity of the district, however, came to an end after the June 1967 war, when Israel annexed the Old City and expanded Jerusalem's municipal boundaries to encompass 70 square kilometers of additional West Bank land, including the district and 28 villages. To secure a Jewish majority in the newly defined city limits, Israel issued special ID cards that conferred the status of residents on the Palestinian inhabitants. Christian and Muslim, whose ancestors had lived in the city for hundreds of years. The cards were subject to renewal and could be revoked at any time. Indeed, as Jewish settlements built on Palestinian lands began to ring the Old City, growing numbers of Palestinian residents of the city lost their ID cards. In the meantime, the Jerusalem municipality had stopped serving the district. Cut off from Jerusalem, which for 2 decades supplied its lifeline, the place began to die a slow death. Barbed wires and military checkpoints were soon set up at its gates. Having lost municipal sanitation services and garbage collection, the community procured its own garbage containers, but these were confiscated by the Israeli authorities. The only way left to dispose of garbage was to incinerate it in a public place within the district. The defining feature of the neighborhood soon became the suffocating odor of the smoke from the heaps of garbage burned daily in the open, not far from the deteriorating villas. So I wanted to read you that before you see the film. I went back to Jerusalem. I spent a month in Jerusalem, and I just connected with one of my uncles there, and my cousin helped me, and I said, can we go to this neighborhood we used to go to when I was a kid? And I will shoot a film there. I didn't know, right, this information. But I think, although my film is just an eye on the neighborhood, all of what you've heard there, you can see in the film, in this kind of just looking. So I think also, as you know, coming from an architectural background, as many of you are, I'd be interested to see how that reads. The other thing to say about it is that there were no building permits issued, but the population obviously grew. So people had to build very quickly and undercover because the area was under Israeli military rule. And there was no permission at all. So they would build very fast, and then they could often be bulldozed as well. So this kind of chaotic structure of urban growth is visible, I think. So the film is 6 minutes long. The introduction is much longer.
فراس كده كده فوق يلا رجع فوق شوف يلا فراس وانطق كمان طابوا على اوفر يلا يلا كويس واحد بعدين حبيبي انوار طلع ليش على الطابه وين مكان الطابه اوفر نسيت اسمك طلع الطابه طيب هون تحت هون اللي هون بالنص واللي بالنص
ايش ابغى تصير؟
عشان شو بتسوي؟ عمرك فيديو 57 ولا 50 إلى 50 سنة
بتصير انا طيب
ترى اليوم ميزانية جودة بتتحمل على المسكوبية بتعرف يعني على المسكوبية يعني أقرب إشي بالعوية الضرايب يقول لك
بتصور هذه مش عليها كل تسكين
بس أنا كل شيء على فكرة يعني
اسمعي يا اخي واحنا شو مثل الابو احنا
لا بس عندنا لما يكون مكبر صور
ان شاء الله مزاج صوت شو يعني
كيف انت خلينا نعرف نصور مش فاهم
I hadn't seen that for quite a long time. What I noticed about it is that it reminds me that I had like £1,200 to make that film. So and this is also similar for the next film I'm going to show. So it's very low budget, so that you see that it's. I shot it on 16 on a kind of what's called a Bolex wind-up 16mm camera, and I then would have the rushes transferred a lab onto a little mini DV. So that's the quality you're seeing. So you get, because I never had the money to go back and do the online. So this kind of very early film. But I don't know, it doesn't actually bother me. I don't know if it bothers you, but to see that kind of, it's just another technology that somehow I remember. So the following year, I went back again, and this time I'd kind of made a friend the year before, and I went back to see her and some other people I'd met. She was a good friend of my aunt, Salwa, and her name is Fatima Hreash. She lived in Jerusalem, and she told me that she would like to take me to visit her family home in Nazareth, where her elderly parents were living on the ground floor. And, as I was saying earlier, it's kind of traditional way of life that's not specific to Arab sites, like many parts of the world are living that way. As the family grew, as the sons married, they would bring their wives and families and make families in the house. And as the daughters married, they would go to their husband's family. So you end up with this growing community within one building, and a building which is growing as well. And this is not the way my family were living, this kind of traditional way of life. So it was totally new for me. But when I visited them, I was really just so taken with it, because I'd never been in that situation where actually property was not your property. It was just something you were using at the time, right? So I remember going there, and we were sitting outside in the front having juice, and I was drinking my juice. There were lots of adults and children around. We're all sitting on plastic chairs around, and then I went to get my juice, and it was gone because someone else was drinking it. So that was like the first sort of sign. And then, go to the bathroom, and like within a minute, there's someone knocking on the door, you're done. So it was kind of, it was just like, you just had to get on with it. And I actually really appreciated that way of life. And of course, I don't need to live like that, but I could see that it was really good, particularly for the children who had so many mothers and fathers and, substitutes and friends and cousins. They were all cousins, they were all together. But also it was very good for the old people, who in our society are really rather lonely in comparison. And, the more I think this was really important moment for me, because since then I've been thinking a lot about nuclear family and what a recent kind of invention that is. I think it's only about 150 years old, the idea of mum, dad and the kids, even less, living and coping on their own. So in this situation, you've got a car to use, TVs to use. It's not necessary for everybody to have one of everything. You get the idea. So I went back. They graciously allowed me to go back and film there. So I spent some 7 days filming there every day. And but I turned the film into a kind of morning to morning, sort of as if 24 hours. And it was during Ramadan. So in the film, you will see the feast of one of the iftars where all the daughters come back and bring their families. So there's a big feast at some point. This is a bit of a longer, I can't remember the exact length. I think it's around 20 minutes.
تعال انزل. يلا 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 تفضل.
شوف الهدف السنة. تصور بسرعة في المحل يعني.
هاي مش كاميرا أصلاً. هاي مش كاميرا.
صوت شغال. صوت شغال.
عندها الصوت مش كاميرا. وش تفكركم بلاد.
ضرب حد.
ونطاط كلها هبل.
العربي في كتير محطات تستفيد. العربي والأجنبي ألطف يعني تلاقي لك إيش تحتاج.
لا منيح اللي بتحطط أجنبي كامل وتقضي كل الليل والنهار وأنت في المحطات. في الأجنبي لما مش مترجمة.
لا المحطات زي 04 40 50 هول مارك اكسل.
طب هاي حيوان ليه ما حط لي 04
كلها
حيوان حط لي محطات إسرائيل بقى.
هول مارك.
لا إسرائيل ما نقدرش نحط محطات إسرائيل.
ايه
انت تابي موجود صح؟ يعني وقت الإجابة لو أجل بشغل بدك تحضري تنزلي مخشية.
شو كله ناقص.
عاملة؟ ده أنا لولا
قاسم
الملابس
أمين؟
ولعت فيها من النار اللي بتقطع في قلبي.
استعار السيارة من دون ما يعرف إنه فيها مسدس أو حتى مسروقة.
بس معقول شاب راشد متعلم سوق سيارة ما معه شهادة سواقة؟
بس أنا وكلت له محامي، الأستاذ كريم جابر، أحسن محامي بهالبلد.
بعرف، اجى لعنا على القسم وأخذ شوية معلومات لنشوف شو بيقدر يساوي.
ودي علي عليك يا أخي، ودي علي عليك. خلصينا الناس يا نجمة مراني ما عرف كيف ولا ما كيف. لك والله ماني عارفة كيف أعمل لا أزعل يا رب.
افرحي صدقيني هيك اسلم واسمعي مني قومي روحي على البيت. انت ما خرجت القعدة الطويلة.
يا بنتي عم أعذبك معي.
ولا عذاب ولا شيء، أنا المسا بيجي بشوف الله.
فتح حمودي
كل شوية رز يا عثمان. ما قصدي بيحمل انجارة.
شو سويتي انت؟
عملت لك الميلاد.
شو هو؟
كسمت بطاطا وكسمت جزر وكسمت دجاج كسمت بندورة وحطيت. بس كنت اسأل احط عليها مية بندورة شوية صغيرة على اساس انه راح
بالضبط. بالخمسة أنا سويت فيها. بالخمسة. وين
ليش نسوي قاعد؟
رايحين زيارة نقعد
بدي اعمل براحة شوية بس المقصد معطش وجهي هيك عشان ما باكلش.
Brilliant from Johnson, and that might be Spain's last chance. Fabulous athleticism, acrobatics from Johnson, and he's kept his side in the tie here. Oh, that's a top save. Now Puyol. Oh, too strong, the touch from Joaquin. Played some delightful stuff here, Spain. Barreron.
وين غطران كده؟ ايش؟
انا مطولة هذه القواعد.
انا القواعد هي انا دي. انا الرز يساوي جدا. ما مي. تعمل
شو اسمه؟ وين غطران الأخضر؟ ايش؟ نعم؟
لازم خليه بالهواء. هذا الهواء اللي ولع النار. بس مش جاي تطريق لا إذا كانت تجربة إذا كانت خلاص هذول فوق ترك بس هات خليه يجيبوا لنا شفة خبزة.
جيب اقرا عبارات اذا بدك. اعطيني عبارات. اعطيني عنه على الولاد. ايش بدك اعمل صينيتين هيك صينيين
هاي سياسة وبنك العربي بيعمل نفس الشيء مع لما كنا نحكي يقول لك ايه انت جاي الشعراء لا يعملوا الشعراء انتوا بتورطوا العالم بس بعد اللي يشتغلوا
هاي بشكل مباشر بشكل غير مباشر عودوا على الناس على زي ما قالوا الرقي والمستوى العالي ولسه بلشوا يخرجوا كان في شغل يعني الناس شدد وحنا في شغل
وين بتنام؟ لا ما عندي خلاص صحيح انا الضغط تبعك تبعك بكره الزهر بعطيك اياه في النهار انا حلمت عشان كان مصاب ايش صوتي مشيت تكون بالنهار بطلع منها تعطيني وش قانون سهل هذا المخمير
الباقي فاتح
بس لبكره بكره بعدين
لازم بصير
So that took a little bit longer. Maybe, so the last film I want to show you is 18 minutes long, I think. So I might just show you a shorter part of it. But it was shot 11 years later in Gaza. Maybe we can talk about it in the discussion afterwards, because there's a lot to be said about how I got there and how I managed to get in there and what happened. But I think I will just show you a clip. Otherwise, we're not going to have time for discussion, right? Yeah. So I think this is the clip. So in the film, I'm using the same kind of camera that you've seen me using, plus in the other films, plus a bigger camera, which is also 16mm, but I can record sound at the same time, has a motor. And I'm using animation, and I'm using sound, music. I didn't allow myself to use any music for like 10 years, and then I decided, enough, I'm gonna use music now. So I'm using music in this film, and silence as well. I wanted to use as many layers as I could to try to get across the bodily sort of sensory and emotional experience of being there to the viewer, right? So that's why I'm using all these different as I say, animation, silence, music, kind of counterpoint music to what you see. But I'll just show you a short clip. What is it? 5 minutes. thanks for your attention. Yeah, it'd be great to have a conversation.
I think I'm going to start with the first question. I have two questions. One kind of deals with a kind of methodological question, and my second is more kind of closely around the three films that you've shown us. So I'm really interested, and I think this also goes beyond the film work, but also your more recent kind of paintings, and also The Invisible Worm, which is a film that was released this year. Am I correct? So I'm interested in how the subject has kind of visual clarity. And I've always felt that there was this kind of attempt to communicate a study of a subject or a series of subjects and complexify them actually at certain moments. And this subject and the complexity of the subject begins to evolve through time, which is, entirely embedded within the kind of filmic quality of not only your kind of media-based work, but also your paintings. And how this kind of relationship between observation and wider notions of the political spectacle in your films come to fruition. So kind of, in other words, what draws you to the very material reality of the way in which the subject and the kind of wider context of these subjects become registered?
Okay. I don't know if that was a two-parter or one.
Two-parter.
Okay. I think I could probably try to answer both parts in one, because I think the way that I've always made the films is that I've got very attracted or disturbed by or drawn to something that I don't fully understand why, and I've wanted to know. And I always felt when I was making the films that I was using the camera as a sort of tool to investigate what it was that had drawn me there in the first place. So in this way, in the shoot, because I use film, I'm very, I only shoot very small ratio, let's say, of what I shoot to what I use most of what I shoot. So I have to be very, very specific. And when I'm there, I think the first part of your question was really about the subject, knowing how when I'm there, I'm really trying to be as much of a sort of channel as I can be. And I used to think of it, when I was doing more of this sort of very sort of detached, sort of fly on the wall stuff, I used to think of myself as mimicking my surroundings so I could just disappear and just being not hidden ever, always very visible, but so engrossed in the process of making the film and doing the little calculations that you need to do with the camera and what have you, that the other person or people who are being in the shot can feel free to be equally engrossed in what they're doing, so that to create an atmosphere of just like deep kind of like contemplative atmosphere, let's say, and to try to use the camera to really look at it and understand the situation. So then the act of editing it is another step towards me sort of turning it over and looking at it and trying to see what it was, and finding some sort of key with which to edit that material. But I think that my aim with the film has always been that when I would show it in a situation like this, there would be a moment where I understood something new at the same time as you people, so that we could do that as a sort of joint activity. So I think, so that's basically where I'm sort of coming from it. So it's not, I don't know if study is the right word, but it is a sort of trying to know why that is interesting against that, and what is it, and try to have that moment on film rather than before making it. So I think like all the things that I'm really drawn to, I guess, in painting, in movies, whatever it is, usually are to do with this thing that actually does move you in some way, but you don't know why, and you need to do the work. And a friend of mine, when I was showing The Invisible Worm, which is the most recent film, said something about the way of looking, which kind of goes so far that you almost cross over into the enemy camp, right? So you kind of, and I think I do overstretch myself in a way. Like I also, The Invisible Worm, that film is kind of about friendship, and when you over-identify in a way with the other, very much the sort of experience of being a teenage girl, I think, and having, your girlfriend, and you sort of think that at some point I used to think that we looked alike, and then catch sight of ourselves in the mirror and see we're completely different. So I have a shock. So yes, that's a kind of practice, I think.
I mean, there's something interesting in The Invisible Worm. I'm sorry, we're talking about a film that exists in all of your imaginations, but I really recommend watching it because it's amazing. And I think that there's this particularly poignant shot that for me kind of folds into these three films that we've seen today, which is a film from a road, I believe, of the Houses of Parliament.
Oh, yeah, and from the water, actually.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you describe... what I think is so interesting about that is this kind of question of citizenship today, now. I mean, you've described in interviews this kind of idea of being British and what that building materially kind of represents. So I think that what becomes kind of significant for me is this kind of meeting constantly, this kind of battle almost between these kind of invisible and tangible, and how they appear through a kind of figure of sometimes, literally brick and mortar and stone, that kind of comprises a building, and how that kind of raises these kind of larger questions around governance, the institution, and all the things that administers. And I think that is so poignant in all three films. And I will segue elegantly into my next question, which really has to do with the kind of question of geography. And I think that it was particularly poignant, and it's the first time in a long time that I've seen a body of work that crosses Palestinian jurisdiction. So moving from the West Bank to the north of what is now Israel, in a Palestinian village, and then over into Gaza. And how your films reveal a kind of nuance of the everyday being slightly different, but that there's a sense of continuity between the kind of project, the occupation, the kind of governance regime that is kind of existing and binding these kind of individuals and collectives to a very specific way of life. And I'm interested in the aspect of time, because these films were shot 20 years ago, roughly.
The first two.
And then and this kind of question of how governance and how the kind of Israeli government has, in a sense, pared back life since these films were made. Because I was actually on the phone with a Palestinian friend of mine who is from the Nakab, and she was describing that one of the kind of latest pieces of legislation that they want to do is forbid the call to prayer. And what was amazing is that your second film ended with this call to prayer. And I began kind of thinking, oh my God, this is going to disappear. And do your films through time begin to have a kind of archival quality to you? What does it mean to kind of sit here today and look back at them? I mean, again, this was kind of, and this is slightly more obvious, but your shots in Gaza, they materially don't exist that way. They are embedded within the ground. And what does time mean? And how is that tied to the role of observation within these projects? Does observation also begin to, through time, serve the role of recording or archiving? Or, how does observation begin to stretch in the context of such a turbulent kind of geography and territory?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I've watched the three of them together. Even though we didn't see very much of Electrical Gaza. We just saw the last 5 minutes. But it's film is always like, that thing of where you look at a star and what is it? I don't know what's the time, but it's like you're seeing it as it was hundreds of years ago or something. It's always that sense that as soon as something's on film, it becomes historic. My family have not been in a film. So I was watching Hreash House and thinking, you know, all those people are 20 years older or dead now, and they're in this. They will always be in these images, you know, and that's, you know, it is very obvious, but it's still that thing of like, oh my God, you know, it's kind of incredible. Definitely, the Palestinian films that I've made have become monuments to things that are constantly being lost. Everything is, as you say, it's being lost and being lost and being eroded. For example, the first one, Dahiet Al-Bareed, was before the wall. So the wall has cut through that community completely and cut it in half. And so I have, you know, I mean, I think there was the very beginnings of the wall when I was there, but it's since been extended and kind of cut off half of that community. In Nazareth, I mean, when I was there, it was the second Intifada. And the people used to say to me, oh, you know, in the West Bank, they're occupied, but we're occupied on the inside. Yeah, that was their feeling of just like, we're not able to even be in opposition to something. But particularly with Electrical Gaza, that film has now shown all over the world, almost. I mean, every week somebody writes to me, and it's on YouTube. So I've just left it sort of publicly available on YouTube that people can watch it or screen it. And it's just awful. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of those things have become a monument to a past that, you know, is lost in more ways than the usual. So the shot of the street going down into the sea, that's Beach Camp, which quite early on was massively bombed. We don't know those people who would be 10 years older or have died then, which was the beginning of a bombardment. It was Operation Protective Edge 2014, or in the current genocide. So they've taken on, they've changed, and all work changes. I mean, not only the world changes, but the work changes as well. So this is just a very extreme example, I think.
I think that I'm really interested in the fact that Palestinian ground has been observed for hundreds of, like hundreds and hundreds of years. Whether it by the Ottomans, the British, the kind of current kind of Israeli Zionist project. What is the kind of role of observation as a counter project? Because I think that there's something really poignant in even the use of film as a method to observe, in that time becomes kind of a significant component in the ability to capture, where all of a sudden the body, a narrative, the movement of someone from point A to point B becomes kind of recorded. And that is a representation of that landscape, that land, the cities, the people that inhabit it, which hasn't been recognized in that way. And obviously they're kind of filmmakers in Palestine, but I'm kind of interested in this kind of the movement of your body from Britain to there, and the kind of possible kind of counter project that is embedded within that.
Right. Well, there's two things I want to say, which may or may not be what you're talking about. One of them is that when I was in Gaza, particularly when we were at Rafah, crossing point, everybody saw me with the camera and said, show them, show them, show them, show them, show them. So there was it's seen as a hugely political tool. There's no doubt that it's part of the weaponry, let's say. And in my particular case, I'm born in London. I've grown up in this country. As I said, everything was kind of kept at a distance, and I only found out more as I became an adult. I feel that in my films, I occupy exactly that position, right? So I'm sort of the empty hole in the middle where there's nothing. And that's why in Electrical Gaza, at the beginning of that clip, you can hear my breath, because it was the first time I decided that I needed to be really clear about the fact that I was there in body. So the idea of the breath is this sort of, sometimes I feel also when you're shooting, I don't always shoot. Sometimes I have a cinematographer, but when I'm shooting, I feel very much my breath against this camera, against my breath. So I had the sound of my breath to kind of put some sort of corporeality into the film, because there's no point at which I want you to think that I'm not there, because that's just not true. And that's
amazing. I wanted to pass it over to the audience if there are any questions.
Hi, thank you so much for showing and talking. I recently had the fortune of watching Denim Sky by you, and I couldn't help but feel like there was a little bit of conversation going on, especially in regards to like Hreash House. I couldn't help but notice a connection to do with the first scene in which we see the children waking up. And I felt that mirror, and I was... So my first question in regards to specifically Denim Sky in relation to Hreash House is like, how did your experience of Palestine in that time, and specifically in this household, inform some of the ideas that you then sort of tackle in Denim Sky? I will also ask a second question, which is...
Can I answer this one then? Because then I forget otherwise. So Denim Sky, I'm just a bit cold now, to tell you about Denim Sky, it's a film I shot over 4 years, and I made it in 3 parts between 2018 and 22. So I shot, so the idea really was that I would open up this sort of process where instead of going and filming something that I was drawn to, I would ask myself more these questions of like, what is it actually that I'm looking for? And I had recently separated from my husband, and I was trying to figure out like, what is my community? How am I going to manage this single parenting back in London? Because I'd been moving around with his job in so many different places, following where he needed to be. So I was in London with the kids alone, and I was trying to sort of understand, how can you live in this way, which was a very difficult situation. I made a sort of somewhat sci-fi film about a crew who are going to go on a spaceship and experience a new kind of space travel, which is using non-linear time. But that was a conceit in order to talk about what constitutes a crew, what makes a community, like how could you live in a non-nuclear family, basically. So I was trying to work with, and I made the film with me, my kids, and some friends. We went on this journey together, right? I would say that thinking had probably begun 10 years earlier with, almost 20 years earlier with Hreash House. Yes, when I'd seen that, because that also reminded me of when I was little in the 70s. And when we went to stay with people, we always slept in the same bed as the kids. Like, we always all slept together, and there was always that. They were the happy times, right? They were the happiest times for me. And so, so that was, I start the film with my kids waking up in the morning. They're sleeping in the same bed because we were staying in all in one room while we were shooting. But it was a direct mirror of that scene. That was the question. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess I was wondering about, like, we're talking about entangled families and like these ideas in communication with each other, but
exactly. So it's kind of about how can I try to, I was looking to find if I could have this sort of collective family life. I mean, I could, but only in these sort of specific times and moments in a way. But yeah, that's what that film is really about.
Thank you. And I have another question, which is still about that film, Hreash House, and how I felt like there was a special attention to the textiles throughout the film, and I couldn't help but think of like how that could maybe inform the method of composing the film, of like these snapshots that are kind of interwoven into one another. And I was just curious about the attention towards the textiles and how that came about.
It's a really long time ago, but I know that I was really struck by that when I visited Hreash Family House, that I was struck by that mixture of traditional Islamic artifacts and things with this sort of more Western other fabrics, and just the mix, and then the TV, which was Israeli TV, and just like the strange kind of collisions, and the fact that already in the early 2000s this was a way of life that was already dying out, right? So it's it felt like on the brink. And I think that just documenting the way that patterns sat over each other back then, for me, was a way to sort of think about pattern as a sort of institution building or routine building somehow, that textile and pattern could be like the beehive or something, like that, how the society is working, how things are kind of linking into patterns, and then how that jars against other things sometimes. So it was really it was mainly about layering, I suppose, of different textiles.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, there's a question over here. Harriet, thanks.
Hello. Also, thank you for sharing your work with us. I was interested on the gaze of your subjects, and I guess both in your methodology of how you approached them when you were filming them, but then also how were you responding at the same time while you were filming, and if you maybe silently behind the camera, how did you kind of get them to relate to you, or like express what you wanted to show?
Right. I was watching that and wondering that myself, actually, because I was just thinking about how much things have changed over time in terms of representation and what is considered the good way to represent people, and if it's even possible, right, to represent people. So that conversation has changed so much in the intervening 20 years in the case of the two first ones, and even 10 years since Electrical Gaza. But I was, a young artist, incredibly curious and incredibly interested, and just wanted to shoot there, and I was given permission. So for me, there was always this sense of deep engagement and interest. And I don't remember ever giving any sort of instructions or I was just there as a guest, So I was being a guest, but I was also quietly doing my filming, and then there was the weird thing about Hreash House was the sound man who was with me, so that you don't see that obviously, but there was this Danish sound man who had come over from Denmark, and he had no idea of the history of the place, and he didn't know anything, and he was completely perplexed by everything, saying, what's the problem, and why do people care so much about their food or their land? I don't care about my Danish food or Danish land. he completely didn't understand. He'd never had any sense of threat or loss in that way in his life. So that was very difficult, I found. But as far as Hreash family were concerned, they thought it was rather normal. A problem happened when we would walk around outside and he would wear these like wraparound sunglasses and combat trousers, and he just looked like an Israeli soldier. And, during Ramadan, we got fireworks thrown at us and what have you. It was just like, you've got to tone down your look somehow. This very tall blonde. But anyway, that's not really what you were asking me about. So I just connected with people. That's why I went there. Because I already connected, right, with the situation. So there's a sort of faith. I have faith in that situation. I think that brings back, it's mirrored back. That they therefore have some sort of faith in me, I hope. But also, there was another part of that maybe I lost it now. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just what I was saying earlier about just being engrossed and kind of certain kinds of behavior happen that it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you're doing nothing. This happens less now because we're constantly looking at our phones. But I remember this from my younger years, like just doing nothing and just sitting and just like in complete like nothing and feeling that time stands still, right? That feeling in a way that suddenly everything kind of got thicker, the air got thicker or something crystallized. And I think I used to have that experience quite a lot. And definitely we've lost those moments, I think, because of how we're all, I mean, I'm addicted to, everyone, I think, is taking in so much information all the time from the phone. But I used to have these experiences a lot. And I used to like to be in that space, let's say, where I'm just kind of passenger, Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Oh, I think Harry at the back, Leela.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm just curious to ask, because it seems like with these films, at least what I understood was that they were sort of your first encounters with these places, and I assume they enabled you to develop sort of connections to them, to the family, maybe the Hreash family. And Georgia was saying they're sort of archival in a sense, but I'm curious about the afterlives of the films, and did you kind of continue having relationships with these spaces even after they've transformed so much or even been destroyed?
In the case of Fatima Hreash, yes, because she was actually a friend of mine. But I mean, we lost touch over the years, but for some years, yes. And I showed the film, everybody in the family saw it. But as often the case with these things, people would just say, well, why is that his son in it and not my son? Like there's a bit of that, or why, But in the other cases of the films we saw today, I mean, the fixer, the main sort of person, and there was this group of men in Gaza who were around us all the time. And one of them was the fixer, and the others were sort of drivers or translators. They were all a small group of men. And I didn't stay in touch with them because it was impossible, actually, in a situation where people are so under siege and in such a difficult situation. The only way to stay in touch is to offer them a way out. And I couldn't do that. And the producer, there was a producer who came with us. There were three of us, myself, a producer, and a sound recorder. So we were three women. She invited one of them to come stay with her and allowed him to outstay his visa, and had a lot of problems with that. And I mean, if it's understandable, right? You want to help people, but you just, then it's like, well, why have you helped that person and not that person? So there was just no way for it other than to sort of I mean, I think that's one of the most brutal things about filmmaking in general, actually, is this kind of sense that you sort of go there and you know, and after a certain amount of time, people would say, can you help with the, we need more space, you know, people, and, the museum could help, who commissioned you or something, so that's the reality of it.
Okay, I think it's 8, no? Yes. Thank you so much for that beautiful
Thanks so much
talk.
for inviting me.
Thank you so much.